I feel like there are very few games where you get to flat out lie to people.
Yeah, and people are pretty uncomfortable lying in everyday life in terms of just directly to someone's face. There's a lot of lies of omission or, well, I'm doing it for a good reason. And I think poker allows you to just peel back and think, you know what? Deception is quite fun.
I'm Sara Jane Ho, and this is Mind Your Manners, where no topic is off limits as we uncover the secrets to feeling at ease in every situation. In today's episode, we are exploring how the tools necessary to be successful in poker are applicable to achieving success in everyday life. That exploration brought me to Gethen Jacobs, a professional poker player who also has his own stable called Hungry Horse Poker, where he and his business partner train and stake other players. Gethen has an interesting philosophy that poker embodies many key elements of life: uncertainty, risk, timing, emotion, and strategy. Just as in poker, we cannot control all the variables in life, but we can control how we respond to them. And how we respond to them is often the difference between winning and losing. Gethen, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me. I love that you said giving me confidence in everyday life. And I'm thinking, what part of poker is giving me confidence to talk about this stuff? And I'm struggling to find that piece of the puzzle right now. But thank you very much for having me.
We might have some listeners who've never played poker before. How would you describe poker to people?
It's a strategy game, of course. And I think it's where luck and skill blur the lines. And I think why people find it so interesting is because, unlike chess, for example, where if I was to play a great chess player, I would lose 100 games of 100 games. And I would be very aware very quickly that I probably don't have a chance. And I think because poker has this element of luck and randomness and what's called variance, we find ourselves being fooled to think that maybe I am the better player. Maybe my skills do stack up well with this person. And I think that poker is a card game, but really it's more about, do I think well under pressure? And the person who thinks better wins more. And I think that I would never make it in the NBA. I'm not tall enough, I'm not athletic enough, but poker is this level playing field, this meritocracy of ideas and understanding. And I think that gives people this opportunity to excel in something without any other required skill sets besides clarity of thought and discipline and dedication to a game.
That is such a great description. And why has poker become such a big deal? Because I feel like it's been elevated to sports status, right?
ESPN probably had something to do with that. Yeah, I would
okay,
never describe myself as a professional athlete because I think that's a huge disservice to people who...
Okay, so let me explain why. Because I feel that people who play it have deals like athletes would have deals.
Marketing, there is quite a lot of money in terms of big online sites. I think there is that blurred line between sports betting and gambling, which I think are separate but often clumped together. I think when it comes to being a successful poker player, I think there's perception and reality. And I think the perception of it, things like Casino Royale, the way
everything in Hollywood.
Right, the way it's portrayed, I think makes it very glamorous, which makes people interested. And when attention is there, so is money.
I feel like also every billionaire and celebrity is out there playing poker. Even the Chinese billionaires,
yes,
they're all grouping together. They're playing on their private jets. They're doing, like literally like all-nighter poker games. And like you said, it's sort of this it's like this ultimate social strategy game. It's pot luck, pot skill, pot bluffing. And I feel like there are very few games where you get to flat out lie to people.
Yeah, and people are pretty uncomfortable lying in everyday life in terms of just directly to someone's face. There's a lot of lies of omission or, I'm doing it for a good reason. And I think poker allows you to just peel back and think, you know what? Deception is quite fun. It's quite nice to be able to tell someone a story that is simply not true, both with your actions and your words at the table, particularly in live poker, where you get to create a narrative with how you act, but also what your bets are telling your opponents at the table. And I think for a lot of people, it's like liberating because you're doing something wrong without any of those social consequences of that person can't be trusted, that person's a bad person.
I love that. I mean, I can't wait to get into all that. But first, I want to start with how this journey began for you. And when did you first get into poker?
I think I was lost. And I don't mean that in terms of like I didn't know what I wanted to do. I don't think I was treating education the way that maybe I should have, which is to say I was good at passing tests. And therefore I thought that that was the path to success, was do well at school, do well at university.
Where did you go to school?
So I grew up in England. I almost said the word education, but I think that's the point that I missed, was that my education wasn't about learning. And I think when poker became a big part of my life, it was when I realized learning is not about being able to regurgitate facts for a test. And then I have this very vivid memory of walking out of an economics exam and physically shaking as if I was like, let the information fall out of my ears, because I'm like, I don't need that anymore. And when I found poker, I realized, oh, this is information that has long-term value. This isn't about learning for a test. This is about learning something that is a valuable skill that I can use again and again and again for life.
And so where did you go to school? You went to Cambridge, right?
I did. I was a
What did you study at
I
Cambridge?
studied economics, but
Was it PPE? What is it? Politics?
It's politics, economics, and philosophy, which I got very little out of, quite frankly. I think one of my bigger regrets is how I treated education, which was that I thought it was a means to an end. And I think like the reason poker became such a clear and exciting part of my life was because it was education for a purpose.
Right, but when did you first start playing? How old were you? Where were you? Who were you playing with?
I probably played a bit in high school, not very seriously.
So you were like 15, 16?
Probably 15 or 16.
Who taught you?
I don't know if anyone taught me. I think I was always good at teaching myself skills.
I mean, was there YouTube back then?
I don't think there was YouTube. I think there might have been a book, which again, learning poker from a book in 2025 is just like probably laughed at. I think I read a book, and then I think I used what I think a lot of people do, which is trial and error. What works, what doesn't. And I think what excited me was the ability to be able to see, oh, that was good because, or that was bad because, what else does that mean? And that journey of learning of like, oh, this worked, but this didn't. I wonder why. I think that was what fascinated me. I played chess relatively competitively. I think the challenge of trying to problem solve was interesting in poker, but I never really saw it as a career. And I think it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I realized I need something that constantly challenges me, and that poker takes a day to learn and the lifetime to master. And I'm not even close. I probably put 60,000 hours into poker.
Well, that's a lot of hours. So, but when did you realize that you were good?
I don't know if I ever realized I was good. I think I've always dealt with this double-edged sword of imposter syndrome. It's both very valuable because when you sit down and you look around the table and you think, everyone must be better than me. Look at that guy. He can do tricks with
Do you think
chips.
everybody's thinking that, or is it just you?
I think probably more people than I would suspect do, but I don't know if to the level, because what it would force me to do would be go home and think, how do I get better than this fictional version of the person sitting across from me?
Okay, let's get into that later on. So you say you never realized that you were good at it, but you made the choice to go pro.
Yeah, I think I always compared myself to people who were better. And I think that is, again, one of these double-edged swords. If you keep moving the goalposts, you keep going, well, yeah, I'm sure I'm better than the person that maybe I started
But that's like a path to success and growth and improvement, right?
I think so. I don't know if it's a path to contentment all of the time, because you're always saying, okay, sure, I'm better than the players that I used to play with. But what about this new player? What about this guy's doing something different? And
Okay,
I think,
okay, but tell us about the time you decided to go pro. Like, when did you decide I was going to go pro? And then what did your parents think about that?
well, I'm very fortunate to have very supportive parents who prioritized education over really anything else. They weren't particularly worried about me being financially okay, because I think they trusted that I would find a way to make that happen. I think they were more concerned with, well, what meaning does poker have? And I think the honest answer is not very much in terms of the game itself. It's a zero-sum game. When I win, someone else loses. I'm not really adding much.
So your parents were completely okay with this. They were
surprised. I don't want to speak entirely for them. They asked a lot of questions, which is, I think, not surprising since they're both therapists.
So your parents are both therapists.
Yes.
Fascinating. What kind, like psycho?
So my mom's a psychotherapist and a a clinical psychologist, and my dad does conflict resolution and negotiation. So I didn't win many arguments growing up. I'll say that. I went to bed at 8 thinking that I had won the argument, and waking up in the morning being like, wait, I wanted to stay up till midnight watching movies.
Do you think that like your parents' professions helped you with poker? I mean,
in a way, yes. And I think the way that they helped me was curiosity and how other people think. Because that's obviously what psychology is about. And I think curiosity in poker is about understanding your opponent's strategy so that you can build a counter strategy to it. The curiosity should not come from, I want to play like this, and I hope that's good. It's, I think other people are making these choices. What would be the appropriate counter to those choices?
you know, that is super interesting because in etiquette, I always say that there is no right and wrong in etiquette, that it's very contextual and it's about what culture you're in, who you're speaking with, understanding where they're coming from, and then using that in your toolkit to communicate with that person. So you decided to move to LA. Why? Is LA like the poker mecca of the world?
I think it once was, certainly for live poker. I spent a lot of time sitting behind a computer playing poker, which is, I would say, more my wheelhouse. I would think that that's about strategy. That's about patterns. That's about statistics. That's about understanding frequencies and building complex strategies to counter the more complex strategies that your opponents are playing.
And why? Is it because you're behind a screen?
Yeah, because you're working with just purely numbers. You might have what's called a heads-up display, which is really just showing frequencies, which are just percentage choices that our opponents have made in hands. And limited data, you don't know who they are. You don't know any context about who they are as a person. You simply have a small amount of statistics about choices they've made in previous hands. And extrapolating that out to play well against them is a very different skill set than sitting down and seeing someone and saying, okay, based on how you look, based on how you conduct yourself, based on how you bought into this game, what does that tell me about how you're going to view the game and what strategy choices might you make?
So you decided to move to LA?
I moved to LA for love, which again is...
So nothing to do with poker.
Nothing to do with poker.
So she's American.
She is very American. And well, when you grow up in England, the idea of sunshine is quite appealing. And there is plenty of that in Los Angeles. I do think poker in LA is very good. It has probably diminished slightly since I've been here. But wherever there's wealth, wherever there is people who want to gamble, there is almost always a thriving poker scene. And LA is no exception. There are, I think, 5 big casinos and a huge home game scene, which is basically wealthy people, whether renting or owning homes, and then hosting games that they kind of cater to high net worth individuals. And sometimes to make those games run, they need professionals who will show up on time and play until the game ends to make sure there are enough people to make that game functional. And I got an opportunity to play in those, although I would say if there was a contrast between playing online, which is just strategy and statistics and this social back and forth and everything but strategy, which is what's so important in those home games, because it's all about networking, it's all about people, it's all about creating an environment that people want to play in, and you have to be part of that environment.
Yeah. Who are some famous people you've played with?
I'm terrible about knowing who's famous. I once played with a DJ whose name, I think his name is Paul Oakenfold.
Oh yeah, love Paul Oakenfold.
Right. And I said, hi, and he said, hi, I'm Paul. And I thought he said open fold, which is a poker term, which means you fold. And I said, oh, you must really suck at poker if they call you open fold. And he didn't really know what the hell I was doing. He just looked at me and then just walked away. So I don't think me and Paul Oakenfold are going to be best friends. I think they probably have different games. This was more about people who wanted to gamble for very frightening amounts of money.
What is a frightening amount of money?
I think that's always, again, context-based. Many hundreds of thousands of dollars, I would say. I think the first 2 or 3 sessions that I played in private games, I left around $200,000 poorer, but maybe a little wiser. So that was jarring for me, especially because in public games and casinos, the stakes are much lower, the swings are much smaller, it doesn't impact your sort of experience, it's not nearly as stressful. I think that was a really good test of like, I think well under pressure, this is real pressure.
And what makes a good or bad poker player?
I used to be able to say with a straight face, I know the answer to that. And now, having staked and coached so many players, I am far less confident. I think there are clearly a couple of attributes that are really important. I think loving the game. I think a lot of people think that, oh, the money will be enough or the success will be enough. It rarely is to get you to sit at a computer and study and think about the game for hours on end. I think a lot of people see the Instagram life of, oh, that person has a nice car or a nice house, and they don't ask, well, what did they do to get that? What was the price they were willing to pay? And I think if you love the game, that doesn't feel like a price. That feels like a great way to spend an afternoon or a morning or a lifetime. And I think that that is the most important skill. And I think then probably consistency. And that's such a cliche, but the person who I would often think was going to be a great player because they showed up and said, I'm going to work 90 hours a week. I'm going to work 100 hours a week. And they did for 2 weeks. And then they took 2 weeks off. And then they worked 40 hours. And then they took 2 more weeks off. And the person who just said, yeah, I think I can do 40 every week, week on week. Those are the players that I've seen in our stable, that I've seen that I've coached, that have continued to progress, because recognizing that poker is this marathon of just continual learning. If you sprint at the start, you either burn out or you stop loving it. And we get back to point one, which is if you don't enjoy it, it's very hard to force yourself to do it.
Wow, I feel like this can be applied to so much of life, right? Any career that you pursue, etc. So it seems like a passion for it and consistency makes a good poker player. Like, is that it?
I think there's probably some level of analytical consistency. And that is hard to see from the outside, I think. And trying to unpack that with someone usually takes more than just a 5-minute conversation. A lot of people can sound very good. I talk about this idea when I'm teaching people of dinner party poker players who, if you talk to them at a dinner party, you're like, that guy's really good at poker. That guy knows, he's saying all these fancy terms. Wow, he's talking about this. He must be a strong player. And then you watch them play and you think, oh, you can't actually do this in 10 or 15 seconds. You don't really have the skill set of being able to both understand it and then execute what you understand. And I think for a lot of the players that I see struggle, it's that they can talk about it, but what they know is not transferable into what they do. And I think that is harder to unpack in terms of what that skill looks like. But I think it mostly comes from the ability to hold on to a logical thread after additional pieces of information are thrown at you after each action. And that is a very simple sounding idea, but as things change, our brains go off in different directions.
Yeah, exactly. When life throws curveballs at you or you're dealt a bad hand, right? Then what do? Interesting. What makes a bad poker player, or why do poker players make bad decisions?
I think entitlement is a big part of it. I would think the worst plays I've made was when I looked around the table and said, I deserve to win. I'm better than, I put in more hours than this person. This person knows less, so therefore I deserve to win more.
It's arrogance.
I think arrogance and complacency probably are the two. And this idea of tilt, and in poker, tilt really just means anything that stops you thinking clearly, right? Anything that creates a fog of war. And for a lot of people, that can be things like losing, that can be someone making a comment that they didn't like, or just feeling like things aren't fair. And I think the big takeaway from poker is things are rarely fair in the short term, right? You can win in a session, you can lose in a session. Probably shouldn't define whether you think you're good or bad. And long term, if you keep making good decisions, you end up with good outcomes.
Yeah, because when I think of gambling, I also think of like maybe investing in the stock market. And when I think about poor decisions made there, I feel a lot of poor decisions are made out of greed or fear.
That's funny you say that. That's my business partner's biggest pitch to why people are beatable at poker, which is when you think about players, a lot of people ask things like, oh, do they have tells? No, they have patterns. And most of those patterns come from fear or greed. They make plays because they're either frightened of the bad thing happening or they are desperate to win all the money right now. And as soon as you see that, you see people who fall foul of sunk cost fallacy. You see people who are struggling to think clearly because all they can see in their mind is the bad thing that could happen. All that they're fixated on is the good thing they want to happen. And that very rarely translates to rational thinking, because that's all about want rather than a systematic approach to, if I take step 1, step 2, step 3, where will I end up? Most of them is, I want to be rich. I want to not lose this hand. Well, unfortunately, that is where we have to give up some control, because on each hand, we don't get to choose. We just get to choose what we do.
Yeah. So it's the greed of wanting more or the fear of missing out or getting in too late or fearful of losing anything and missing out on
Fear
growth.
of loss is risk aversion is how we would describe that in poker, which is just like, risk aversion is very healthy in life often, right? Like looking both ways before you cross the road, really good idea unless you want to get hit by a bus. In poker, sometimes risk aversion lets us justify decisions that are not strategically correct. Well, I don't want to lose. The fear of losing is greater than the joy of winning, almost always for everyone. And therefore, people make predictable decisions like folding too much or not bluffing enough, because both of those are frightening, right? Fear-based thinking. And if they don't, well, they don't feel like the risk that they're taking is as high, therefore the consequences are lower.
Yeah, well, that's a great jumping point for the next thing, which is poker as a metaphor for life. But before we go into all those specific skills, and you had a bunch of terms in there that I'm dying to go over, like tells and patterns, can we first start off with the casino? Because I remember when we met before, you told me that you see the casino as a metaphor for the world or the life that we live in, and how it's distracting.
It is distracting. And I think that when I tried to get good at poker, I tried to learn to think really well. And I learned to think really well in this perfectly controlled environment, which was my office with headphones on and no distractions and nobody breathing on my neck or asking if I wanted a drink or having not showered for 2 days, right? These are all optional things in poker. Showering is not mandatory, apparently. So going to the casino and it being this cross-section of society and this level of distraction, if you haven't practiced and trained in that environment, it immediately disrupts everything that you thought you would be able to do in the optimal conditions that you had at home. And I think that I realized that quite quickly when I went to the casino. I was like, I play a lot worse here than I do when I'm at home thinking. And I thought, well, either the drive to the casino, I'm bumping my head on the windshield and I'm forgetting stuff, or something's different. And it was pretty clear that something was different. My immediate reaction was, oh, I need to train in the environment that I'm in.
Yeah.
So,
Because one is a controlled, right? Your home is a controlled environment. You can control everything. But out in a casino, you can't.
you can't. So I was like, I have to bring that lack of control home with me. I have to put on headphones instead of listening to music that allows me to focus. I have to put on talk radio. I have to hold chips. I have to create an environment that replicates what I'm actually facing, because without practice in that environment, I'm always going to struggle to play how I think I should based on how I remember playing in that optimal environment at home before. And I think casinos are designed deliberately to be a space where people lose track of time because they want you to stay. And they are built to be these kind of almost church-like experience of everyone's there. There's this euphoria. There's this excitement.
There's hot girls.
Not as many as you might think. Maybe
I guess only in the James Bond movies.
only
right?
in the James Bond movies. Yeah, maybe one or two. Again, as a happily taken man, I of course eyes on the prize, which is other players' chips, not other people's phone numbers. Yeah, there is especially in home games. There's loud music. There's cocktail waitresses trying to give you drinks. All of this can be very uncomfortable if you're not used to that environment, and forcing you to be essentially accept that you don't get everything your own way. You don't get the perfect environment. You don't get as much time as you think you deserve to think, and that you have to cater for the experience of others was a very helpful life hack for me of recognizing I don't get things all my own way. Playing online poker, it felt like I did. I got to play when I wanted. I didn't even have to put on pants if I didn't want to play, right? There's showers are not an issue when there's just a screen and just as much time in the day, and there's always games. And I think going to the casino, both the environment and the recognition that this is customer service, that these people I'm playing with deserve a good time, because I would spend $15 on a movie ticket and feel maybe I got $15 worth. These are people who are losing at poker, and
Because they're playing against you.
well, they're playing against me and other players who are winning players. and they are still enjoying it. They
Yeah.
feel, whether they are losing $100 an hour or $1,000, there has to be some element that either one, they think they can win, which is why poker is not dead, because people's ability to recognize whether they can or can't win is poor. But mostly that there has to be some level of enjoyment in that time, that it has to feel like it was worth losing $100 an hour. And that partly comes from, did they enjoy the experience of playing with you? And I think conversation, enjoying their wins, being happy for them, even if it came at your expense, being someone who people want to play with.
It's like the whole package, right?
Yeah,
Question.
and I didn't have that. I absolutely did
Oh.
not have that. When I first went, hand on my shoulder, headphones on, I just didn't. I
You didn't want to
to
engage.
Well, I wanted to create a bubble that replicated what it was like playing at home.
Yeah.
But I realized, oh, that cost me a lot of money, because the person who would have stayed for 3 more hours to play, well, this game's not that fun. I'll go home now.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll move to another table. This game's boring.
Right. You want to be somebody that people want to play with so that you can win. Mm-hmm. Do you count cards?
Yes, but that is for blackjack, which is why I think poker is so interesting, which is to say the misconceptions around poker, what's both important in terms of strategy, but also how it functions, often are not well understood by even people who know the rules in play. So counting cards is how you would win at blackjack, right? But you're playing against the casino. Now, casinos don't like to lose money. Casinos are very big and shiny and often quite expensive. So when they catch you counting cards, they kick you out.
They ban you.
They ban you from the... Now, playing poker, you're playing against other people in the casino. The casino is making money from what's called rake, which is a small percentage of each pot they get to keep. So they don't care if you win at poker, because you're not taking the money from them, you're taking it from other customers who have voluntarily come to the casino to play. So yes, counting cards is a great way to win at blackjack. There is a small element of card counting, which is to say in poker, you want to be tracking odds and equity, which is to say, oh, if there are 9 cards that can help me with 1 card to come, therefore I have X percentage. I have 18% here to hit my hand on the river to make a strong hand. But in terms of what people think are the skills, I think a lot of people see you must need to be an MIT grad to be a great poker player. I think the math skills needed to be a strong poker player are very small. It's much more about analytical thinking under pressure than it is about crunching numbers in your head.
If you kind of just survey which cards are out, it's also being better prepared, right? So it's like you limit the unknowns, you limit the variables. And if you know what cards are not coming out, you can better guess which ones potentially will.
Yeah, I think often it's about trying to put a puzzle together. And I think what that comes down to, it's less about what cards are coming. It's more about what's called the range of hands that our opponent could have, right? So they only ever get dealt 2 cards in a no-limit hold'em game. But you don't know what those 2 cards are unless they're very nice and turn them over, which they tend not to do even if you ask. So they have 2 cards, but they could have many variations of those 2 cards. And that's called a range. That's a group of potential hands they could have. And what our job as good poker players is to essentially filter what the most likely types of hands that they would have through information, whether they just called or they raised or maybe some physical tells. Certainly not an area I'm particularly strong, but it's about this filtering process so that I am better prepared to estimate, I think this person has this type of hand, or maybe even this specific hand. Because if I can do that, my response, quite straightforward, doesn't require me to count cards or memorize anything else. It just requires me to understand from all of the available information what this player probably has and what they're likely to do with that hand.
So I want to run through some key elements of poker and how we can use them to supercharge success in our own lives. And listeners, make sure you...
I'd love to know.
Oh, yeah. And listeners, make sure you stick around to the end where I'm going to ask Gethen to give us the skills to bluff like a pro. So let's start with the poker face. How's your poker face?
I would say pretty poor, which is probably a surprise to some people.
It is a surprise.
Right. I don't think I have a particularly good poker. And I think that what that should illustrate is that knowing what's important is not always easy. And having a really good poker face, I think a lot of people probably hear that in a movie, or maybe they think, oh, that's probably what successful players are. They have this ability to sort of shut down emotion and be like unreadable.
Yeah, like in Suits. I've been watching Suits recently since it got put on Netflix. And Have you ever watched it? In
I've
Suits?
seen a little. I'm familiar with what the show. I don't watch a lot of television because I just.
Yeah, you don't have time. Okay, so Harvey Specter in Suits, he's kind of like he's the lead and he's attractive and he thinks well under pressure. He's a very good poker player. He's in contrast to Louis Litt, who is like very emotional, has outbursts,
Right.
obviously would be a terrible poker player. And obviously Harvey Specter is way more attractive. I mean, at least to
I
me.
have not found that correlation. If you were to line up 10 poker players, I don't know if you're finding America's Next Top Model.
Okay, but what makes a good poker face?
What's happening behind the face? What's happening in your mind really makes you a good poker. The ability to think well and to probably not let that show. I think, again, it'd probably be flippant to say a poker face doesn't matter. But most of the time, when you go and play poker, this is something that was quite shocking to me, is everyone's in a little bubble of their own world, their own problems, their own thoughts. Which is to say, when I'm playing, I played hands and realized the person who I played that hand with didn't look at me once. He barely knew he was all focused on what's my hand, what's the board, how much is in the pot. Do I have a good, like that? It's all me. It's all I want, I need.
Which puts him on the defense, right? I mean, it kind of doesn't give him an advantage.
Well, it doesn't give him any extra information, right? Which is to say that I could probably have been shaking my head and sobbing, and he wouldn't have picked up that I was unhappy with my hand, right? Like the inability to pay attention, I think, is probably why I would argue a poker face is not hugely relevant to be a successful poker player. But I think what's happening behind your eyes, the ability to
maintain composure, I
yeah,
guess.
the composure and the rational thinking. Like, poker is quite stressful. I used to wear an Apple Watch so that I would have my heart rate tracked when I was playing poker hands. And you're sitting at a table doing lifting chips are not heavy, right? Poker chips do not weigh you down. You do not need to go to the gym to be able to move chips into the middle. And I would look and my heart rate would be 170.
Wow.
Because
That's like more than me sprinting.
yeah, which is just showing, like, one, probably don't have a great poker face because my heart rate is probably pounding, but that our body and brain is not great at distilling what's real danger and perceived for danger. And that the anxiety and adrenaline rush of high stakes poker feels just like there's a tiger in the grass over there and this is real and I'm in danger. And I think like that is mostly why spending a lot of time practicing staying composed, practice going, oh, I feel flustered. Okay, how do I unpack that? And I think a lot of people in life, me particularly too, is like when I don't know what to do, it feels like my brain shuts down. It feels like I am struggling to take the next step. Oh, I'm out of answers.
Yeah, it's called emotional flooding, right? Like where you don't know how to reply. But can you give us an anecdote? Like give us a poker face anecdote, whether you had a good one or you didn't have a good one. Give us a specific, concrete story.
Sure. So I was playing actually in Los Angeles, and I had pocket aces, which is the best possible hand in poker. And I raised, and this older gentleman is on the phone with his daughter. And he's very sweet. And he's talking to her about where they would go for dinner in an hour or two. And he's has a flip phone. So that tells you his level of technological savvy. And he looks down at his cards and he says, honey, I got to call you back. And he closes his phone. And then he raises me, which is the world's best tell / piece of information I've ever got, because someone who's willing to hang up on their daughter while making plans to play a hand with me has an unbelievably good hand. And when you have the best hand and they have very likely the second best hand, this is going to work out very well for me. And I think this ability to recognize, okay, this is a once in a lifetime piece of information. And if I don't think well in this moment, because I've never studied that sport, that sport has never come up in my many hours of review and thought, how do I problem solve in real time? This person has probably pocket kings. How do I make
It's pocket,
sure?
yeah, so
second
that's
best,
second
best possible.
because you have
hand.
the best.
I have
Okay.
the best. I have pocket aces. He almost certainly. So basically, my thought process was, how do I extract the most money from that range of hands? And because it's a new situation, I don't have things to fall back on. So I just have to ask myself, okay, well, what happens if? And just start considering options. And there was probably a time when I would be maybe earlier in my poker career when a new situation, that emotional flooding of, oh, I haven't done this before, I don't know what to do, would shut down everything and I would just react. right? I would just make a play and then look back on it after the sort of fog cleared and think, how did I do that? Well, it didn't make any sense. There I was able to go, okay, this is new, but I have a very clear understanding of what they have. How do I make the best play? And just problem solving in real time. The more
But
information.
how do you use your poker face? This needs to be a story about your poker face.
Well, I try not to laugh in that situation. Was quite important in terms of poker face.
Because he was such a newbie, right? He was so green, right? Like
Well,
he was giving you
he
his
was
tell.
both so green and so like just
Earnest.
emotionally honest in
Yeah,
that
emotionally
moment.
honest.
Like that, he was just like
Like he had no poker face.
he had
right?
no poker face. I think is probably which is to say like. Would you hang up on someone you care about just to play a crappy hand against someone? No, of course not. You would be like, all right, I'll wait for this one. And he was going to leave in a few minutes, right? Like, I think in terms of my own poker face, I don't think I've given it away in a hand, which is it. But I have found myself in situations where I go, oh, if I talk now, I'm going to sound uncomfortable and scared.
And lose my poker face.
And I'm going to lose my composure. And I think sometimes it's more about recognizing what you can't do than what you can do. And in those situations, I remember just thinking, yeah, I'd love to be able to talk and sound confident and essentially create a false narrative. But I don't think I am, in this moment, capable of doing that. So saying nothing and appearing possibly weak rather than opening my big fat mouth and confirming it felt like the far better solution in that moment.
And I feel like that can really be applied to real life situations where if you are feeling emotional, whether it's a work situation or fighting with your significant other, right? I mean, sometimes it's better to not let emotions dictate your decisions because if you become too emotional, maybe you'll make a rash decision.
Yeah.
And then you lose.
I think pause is the one of the, like I always teach our horses, even if you are 99.9% sure that this is the play you're going to make, what does 5 more seconds of going, well, what about another option? Am I absolutely sure? Did I make sure I really considered that this is the right move? And I think that beat is really valuable because a lot of the time urgency is not real. Like I have to do something right this second. Inaction feels often weak and defensive. And I think often it gives us power because it gives us time to zoom out and perceive the battlefield and actually ask ourselves, is this the right move? Or is there an opportunity to gather more information? Is there an opportunity to let my emotions settle before I then pick a course of action?
Yeah. So it's managing emotion and thinking well under pressure. Yeah. So you mentioned the tell a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask, is it a real thing or just a Hollywood movie thing? But it seems like it is a real thing.
It's definitely real.
Do you have any, like, what are common tells at the poker table? Do you have any tells?
Almost certainly. I think we're all human, right? We're not robots. And I think that pretending that we have complete composure, that we give no information away would be delusion, which is probably maybe the third most costly thing when it comes to being successful at poker is essentially fooling yourself into that you have more figured out than you do. So yes, I unquestionably have tells. Fortunately, most people are not looking for them. And if I am playing against someone who I think is competent enough to be looking for them, there are a few things you can do to mask them. And I think like the most common one is what we would call like a timing tell, which is when people act really quickly, it's usually because they have what they perceive to be an easy decision, which usually means that if you think about that, you can probably rule out certain parts of possible hands they could have because those would be more difficult, or they might be considering other options. So when they very quickly call, you go, okay, they probably don't have a really good hand. They probably don't have a really bad hand. And I think like recognizing for myself how often I've just played quickly because I'm like, oh, this is easy. And how much I was probably leaving out there for the world and how fortunate I was that so few people, I think probably in life and in poker, are paying attention to the outside, to other people. I think we are all the hero of our own story. And I think in poker, to be really good, you have to be incredibly empathetic or understanding of other people's stories. Because other people's stories, this sounds horribly psychotic. Other people's stories will unpack all of the mistakes they make and therefore all the ways to beat them.
It's funny that tell you mentioned, because I've played poker just a couple of times. I didn't even realize that was a tell until you told me, until you just said it. And it's true. Like if I have a really good hand or a really bad hand, I'm thinking. But if it's kind of middle, move very
you just
quickly.
go with the flow. I know what I'm going to do here. And I think like there are probably many of those type of tells. I think a lot of people, when they're uncomfortable, can kind of move. I think sometimes when people are comfortable, they don't mind having genuine smiles and laughing and talking. And I think like those are all real, but I think that those almost always, for me certainly in poker, come as secondary pieces of the puzzle, right? There are all of these clues in a hand. How do they play? What do they bet? All of these things. If I'm not sure, I talk about this idea of like tipping point factors. Like I'm on the edge. I don't know which way to go. Was there extra information? Maybe a tell, maybe some pattern that I've seen them use before. Maybe that will be the deciding factor between me calling or folding or raising.
Do like people close to you have tells that you can?
I think everyone has tells, but do we think of them as tells? I think we think of them as patterns of behavior, perhaps. In terms of tells around me, I think knowing when my girlfriend is unhappy with me is certainly a pretty good tell.
Well,
right?
what does she do? Does she like stop speaking to you, or does she go, no, everything's fine?
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
If things are fine, there is certainly something I need to find out what I did.
Well, you're an enlightened man, because a lot of men out there are like, oh, but my girlfriend said that everything's fine, so everything's fine.
She says I can do whatever I want. Yeah,
but
that's
hey,
a trap.
Yeah,
do not
it's
do
a
not
trap.
fall into that one.
It's a big tell.
Probably are tells. I don't know if I think about those in my life, but I do think that same process of trying to be empathetic, trying to be understanding from their perspective. I think the real skill it's given me is not being defensive when someone says something I don't like or disagree, and trying to think, why do they feel this way? Can I understand that if I was to think of life as a map, can I navigate to where they are and see the world from their perspective? And I think like poker has helped me do that, because in poker that's very effective for winning money. I think in life that's very helpful for understanding, the people you want to surround yourself with, and maybe what you've missed in why they feel a certain way.
Yeah. I feel like even when you think about people who are mean or rude, it's usually because that's a big tell. It means they're very unhappy or damaged people. And if you look at bullies in high school, they usually come from very unhappy homes, right? Like a lot of conflict in their homes. And I think that's a big tell. And even if we are able to be logically consistent, poker also has an element of uncertainty and luck, like you mentioned.
A huge element of uncertainty and luck.
Because we never know, the deck is shuffled. You can never fully predict which cards are going to be dealt. And like you said, no matter how skilled you are, it's not like chess, where if you're very skilled, you're going to win
Always
100. Always win, right? There's this element of luck that influences the outcome. So what do you do when you're dealt an unlucky hand?
Be grateful. I know that sounds like an unusual answer, but that is true.
Grateful for an unlucky hand?
Incredibly good. Because if there wasn't unlucky hands, there wouldn't be poker, right? If you look at chess, again, chess is an incredibly complex game, but skill entirely based. Right now, nobody's out there who's an amateur chess player going, I can beat Magnus Carlsen, right? The greatest chess player probably ever. In poker, there are thousands of people lining up because they did once. They got lucky in a hands. They got lucky in a session. They got lucky for a month. So I am incredibly grateful when I face bad luck, because without bad luck, I wouldn't have a career.
Wow, that was an unexpected answer. But I remember thinking, and in the same way that you said, when you get dealt an unlucky hand, you're grateful. I was actually always grateful that I had her for the first 21 years of my life. When my mother actually passed away, and anybody who ever asked me and said, oh, it's so sad that your mother is gone, blah, 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 I said, yes, but you know what? I feel like I'm really lucky to have had her. And for my most formative years. Right.
She shaped you to be a 21-year-old young woman ready to explore and succeed in the world.
Right. But I feel so much of it is your perspective. I certainly have friends who, after like a breakup of 3 months, are like moping for 3 years, but it's like, it's all about your perspective. And even I think there's a beautiful quote from, I think it was like Dr. Seuss or something. It says, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. And that is kind of my philosophy on life.
Yeah. Enjoy the journey. I know there's so many cliches that I think often like do capture that they become a cliche for a reason, right? They
Yeah.
become something that if you are so fixated on everything has to be perfect or I have to get to this end point, like stopping and smelling the roses smell pretty good. I guess my follow up is, do you think the bad makes the good better, or that contrast makes it easier to appreciate? Because I was thinking about that in poker. It's just like when you have a group of bad sessions in a row and then you have a win, you go, oh, I do remember how to win, and
Yeah.
it's almost
It makes
nice.
you value the game
Yeah, because if I won every time, I think I would lose meaning in that. And I'm curious if
completely.
that's outside of poker as well for you, that you feel like those kind of challenges allow you to appreciate small, simple things a little bit more.
I guess you could say it's bad luck, or you could say call it a failure. But a lot of the times when I've failed at things, that's been the greatest opportunity for learning for me. So absolutely grateful for those times, because I do analyze. I go back. Was I best prepared? I wasn't. Right? How could I have done better? Like next time. So moving on to assessing risk and making calculated risks. So how can we apply this to life? Like, what do we do in moments of uncertainty and bad luck in real life?
For me, anyway, I try and step back and I ask myself, and this sounds maybe not quite how I mean it, but did I deserve that bad luck? Because there's that quote which like, the harder I work, the luckier I seem to get. And I think that often in life, when I feel like, that was unlucky, it was like, well, was I as prepared? Did I do everything I could? And if the answer is yes, acceptance is much easier. And I think poker has taught me about acceptance because it's taught me that I can't control all the outcomes, right? Because of luck. Sometimes I'm going to win, sometimes I'm going to lose. The ability to be at peace with outcomes has allowed me, when luck hasn't gone my way, and also to just zoom out and say, I'm incredibly lucky. I'm incredibly lucky to have two wonderful parents, to be healthy. This is a small drop in the ocean. This is an inconvenience rather than a life-altering event. And if it is a life-altering event, then I will have to work through to find the best version that I can be in that life
In that
altering
event. That actually happened to me. I feel so when I was 21 years old, it was my senior spring of Georgetown. I was in university, and my mom got diagnosed with terminal liver cancer, and she only had a couple months to live. And I remember my father saying, your life has been very smooth up until now, but this is it. And then you just kind of have to learn to adapt to changing circumstances and be resilient and be your best self in that situation. Life is never smooth.
You mentioned not having to struggle with adversity. Did you feel that that was a net benefit, or perhaps at that moment thinking, maybe some more struggle in previous aspects of my life would give me new skills to be able to adapt to something that is the most difficult, the loss of your mother in a situation where it's so sudden, so jarring? Did you feel that because life had been smooth, that made that all the more difficult?
I was fairly young. What was interesting is that a lot of my college friends then came out as a support network, and all of a sudden friends were coming out saying, I lost my father in a car crash when I was 7. Like, let me be here and support you. And that overwhelming support from friends or even just acquaintances, people I didn't even know that well, really helped me through. That made me see a beautiful side of life. So I would say it helped me deal with a really big challenge like loss at a very young age. And it was able to let me be empathetic later on when friends would lose their parents or siblings, to really be able to help them through with that.
Because you saw the value of that community when you felt lost and alone, to be able to say, oh, I can be that for someone else when they're feeling very much how I was.
Yes. And also just learning the tools to deal with grief and loss. I mean, I feel like after losing my mother, I often say that was the worst year of my life, because in the same year I lost my best friend. And literally every year after that, even no matter what happens to me after, I think, well, I've been through the worst. Like nothing is as bad as that. And it
perspective
gives
is a powerful tool.
Perspective, and you can't always just expect to have a really good life, right? Like in Chinese perspective, we say there's yin, there's yang. Like there will be good times and there will be bad times, and so life is unpredictable, just like at the poker player. But we just have to adjust our strategy based on what we're given. what is your risk tolerance in life? Like, tell us about
Low, very, very low. Yeah. I mean, I almost didn't do a podcast with you. That's how low my risk tolerance is. Yeah, very low, which is, I would say, not particularly advantageous for poker. I think when I train poker players, one of the helpful shortcuts is, oh, this person has quite a low risk, like quite a high risk tolerance.
And you think that's a
I
good
think that's
thing,
a huge
good thing
because
for poker.
training someone to be more disciplined and to slow down when it comes to things like bluffing is actually much easier than saying, hey, I'm going to push you off that ledge here. It's going to be really uncomfortable. You need to speed up. That is a much harder, in order to get that inertia, much harder push than the person of like, hey, you could just not be all in and lose all the money all the time. That could be a new strategy you pick. So I do think that generally it is a good attribute. It wasn't one that I had. I had to train it into myself. And I think seeing is believing, for me anyway. And the only way that I was comfortable increasing my level of risk was to see that that was, in poker terms, the optimal solution. That was the highest EV. Expected value was greater if I took this more risky option. And I think when I did that enough times, it no longer felt like risk. It felt like right. It felt like the best play. And I became obsessed with the best play rather than the safest play or the most, like, if you reformat or you sort of reframe what it is you care about, and I just cared about EV, the best possible plays, risk became a much smaller piece of that because I'm not thinking about risk. I'm thinking about correct plays, and risk is a very small piece of that in poker. But poker is a very controlled environment. The worst thing that can happen in poker is you lose some money. That's about it. Maybe if you lose a lot of money, someone comes and breaks your legs. That's about as bad as it gets in poker. Now, in life, that's not true. There are no safety nets in life. And I think that my risk tolerance in life and my risk tolerance in poker are very different because I recognize in poker that low risk tolerance is allowing me to play well. Or high risk tolerance in life, I'm not so sure. So I think that I have two very yin and yang in terms of approaches to risk. In life, pretty risk averse, pretty cautious. I'd like to think of myself as being a pretty thoughtful investor, a pretty careful evaluator of potential downside. In poker, more of a maniac.
But I feel like even in life we have to take chances, right? Whether it's investing in stocks, it's getting married,
Right.
choosing who we marry, starting a family, changing a career, or moving to a different country, right? These are all levels of risk.
They're huge levels of risk. And I think it's dealing with doubt. It's like, I don't know if this is the right. Time will tell. I remember
Time always tells.
Time always tells the truth. And I remember a figure skating coach actually told me that. Not that I was a figure skater, but it was my friend's dad. And he said, yeah, time always tells the truth. And that has always stayed with me because I've made lots of decisions. Moving countries, picking poker, picking my girlfriend, all of these pieces, building a life together that you don't know if they're right.
You don't know.
You
Yeah.
never know.
You can get married, you can get divorced,
Of
right?
course, nobody on their wedding day, or maybe very close now, has ever thought, yeah, this is going to end in a divorce, right? Everybody, as they say their vows, believes this is forever, which just shows how much certainty can be...
and 50% of people divorce.
Right,
So.
can be broken by, well, things have changed. And I think what that has taught me in life is that it's okay to pivot and it's okay to be wrong, and that life is not criminal law. It's not beyond all reasonable doubt. It's a preponderance of the evidence. This seems most likely to be the best play or decision or
At
choice
that time.
at that time,
And that's
with the
decision you
available
make.
information that I have.
Yeah.
And if things change, give myself permission to change with them.
Yeah. You know what, when you said time will tell, I mean, when I was in 2012, I graduated from Harvard Business School and I was thinking about what I wanted to do, and I wanted to move to Beijing and open an etiquette school, right, doing a startup career. And a lot of people, especially my Hong Kong friends, Hong Kong's very conservative. They were like, oh my gosh, you're so courageous for going to Beijing. They made it sound like I was going to Africa.
Right.
Or something. They're like, for going
At
to
the
China.
head of an arm, you're going to go fight some battles.
Yeah, and to go there and start your own etiquette school, and how do you even do that in China, and you don't even really speak Mandarin very well. And I remember my dad was like, when I told my dad about my idea, he said the time is right. China needs it right now. You are very well placed to do this. And he said, and what is the downside? In 6 months, you'll know if it works out or not. He was like, you're 26 years old. In 6 months, you'll know if it works out or not. And if it doesn't, you can go back to doing volunteer work for your nonprofit, which is what I was doing before Harvard Business School. So I was like, yeah, I guess, time will tell.
Right. That fear of not getting it perfect, so you end up doing nothing, that
Yeah, it's actually crippling.
it really can be.
All right, what about knowing when to fold and let go? Like, when should you fold playing poker? Tell us about a story.
More often than I probably do. I would say that I am a curious bear. I like to see what they have, because the danger of poker often is you put your strategy onto them. And I would bluff. So therefore I should call. And most people don't play like I do, thankfully, hopefully, right? Because if they did, I wouldn't win any money from them, and I would have to find some other career, and no one wants me for anything. So I would be looking at situations and going, well, against myself, I should of course call, and forcing myself again to get out of my own way. I'm not the hero of this story. It's about them. It's about their choices, and finding ways to understand other people and understand how they think made it much easier for me to get better at folding and to fight curiosity. I think I've always been quite curious, which is why strategy games are very appealing, because, what else? What's the next level? How do I get better? Well, is there other books? Is there other learning tools? And fighting the ability of going, I want to know, but I think I know enough to not need to see. And that for me in poker took a lot of training. And I always tell people who I'm coaching in our stable, if I had just folded all of those situations, I would have more money than I do now. So really dumb people don't learn from their mistakes. Normal people mostly learn from them. Really smart people learn from other people's mistakes.
Oh my gosh, you know what? When I was growing up, this is what my mother would say. She'd say, Sarah, there are 3 types of people in the world. The first type of person learns from their own mistakes. The second type learns from other people's mistakes. And the third type doesn't even learn from their own mistakes. So it's exactly what you said.
I like the framing of that better.
She was like, what kind of person do you want to be?
And I always try and teach our hosts, I say, I can never think for you, but I can show you what didn't work, so I can give you a fast forward button so you don't have to make the same mistakes. And I think like that as an educator now, God, that sounds so fancy. As a poker coach, I try to help people avoid making the same mistakes that they aren't learning from, and maybe to sidestep some that they haven't even made yet, because I can say, hey, I made this mistake. Here's how to avoid it.
Because life is full of situations that we may have to let go, right? Maybe it's a job that no longer serves us, or a relationship that's become unhealthy, or a goal that's no longer achievable. I feel like in some cases, if we stick with a thing past its point of value, we're actually wasting time and resources, and that leads to a negative outcome.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for you around that, because stubbornness can be a virtue and a hindrance. And I think that I'm quite stubborn.
So am I.
I think there's a reason why I became a poker player, because no one can really tell me what to do, right? And I think stubbornness can keep you at something until you get good, but it can also keep you at something while it remains toxic. And I was wondering like how you balance that sort of like, you know what, I'm going to make this work. I can make this work with this. Maybe I can make something else work better. Maybe letting go is the right decision right now.
You know, it reminds me of this relationship I was in my early 30s, and I dated a guy for 4 years, and I really should have gotten out because he was very insecure and very controlling. And I think the reason why it went on for so long was because we were separated by COVID. So there was a bit of distance. You know, I was in my early 30s, and, you know, you mentioned sunk cost fallacy at the beginning of this interview, right? Which, for those of you who are not familiar with economics, it's like when you feel, oh, I've invested so much. Like for me, I was like, oh, I'm 33 or I'm 34. I've already invested 3 or 4 years. Like maybe this is as good as it gets. It's hard to meet someone these days. And I was living in China. I was like, it's hard to meet someone in China. It just wasn't serving me. And I just ended up being so resentful, and then broke up with him. And I feel like I should have known when to fold. I should have folded early.
Is there any tips that you would give? Because I think I struggle with that too. I think my desire to make things work, because understanding how things work and then figuring out how to do that, that's poker. And I love that. But in life, some things don't work. Or if they do, they come at such a cost that they aren't worth making work. And I'm curious if you have any, like, I suspect if you did that again, you would do it differently. You would probably end that relationship. What are the most telling signs, right? Talking of tells, what are the biggest tells that you would have in that situation of like, it is time to fold this relationship?
Yeah, time to move on. And my heart was like, I'm so unhappy. And I was trying to use too much of my head.
Funny, because poker hearts are very dangerous and heads are very helpful, because in a poker hand, like I said, the worst thing that can happen is you can lose. But if you think well, probably mitigate a lot of that. In life, hearts tend to be very honest in terms of, I'm not happy. Like there's something is wrong. Even if I can tick all the way, well, they give me the security. All of these things that I said on paper I wanted, if I don't feel happy, there is clearly something missing.
And it's your intuition.
Yeah, it's less tangible. And that's why I'm always a little hesitant saying, oh, poker has taught me this. Because poker is this incredibly controlled environment, right? There's always rules. Like at no point is someone going to say, oh, this hand actually beats this other hand. We've decided to change the rules. It's always this controlled system. Life has so much less control that we have to kind of make the rules up as we go along.
Totally. And that's why I think it's important to really live your life and to go date many people, to go when you're young, try a number of different jobs, right? Go travel to a bunch of different cities. And only then do you have a frame of reference and you know more about, at least every choice you're making takes you closer to the life that you want to live. Yeah,
I think a lot of people look back on their life and think, wow, I made 3 choices and...
That's not enough.
That's not
enough. You should
enough.
Be making like 30.
Right.
You know, you should be dating a lot of people.
There should be a lot more short mistakes, I think, in life.
Yes. So we talked about knowing when to fold. What about knowing when to double down? Like how to take advantage of a situation?
Yeah, for me, the version of that is... Like
give us a poker scenario where you doubled down.
I think for me, often it's, poker games evolve over time, which is to say they get tougher because people who lose run out of money or run out of joy of playing. So when games are good, which is to say when there are players with plenty of money who want to play, that is the time to double down, because you might say, oh, in a month the game will still be there. It might not. And what that has often meant for me is, all right, this week, I'm not going to sleep very much. I'm going to play a lot of poker because this is probably worth, in terms of value, the next 2 months perhaps. Because if this game disappears or this opportunity disappears and I haven't seized it with both hands, there will be regrets, frustration, and maybe not another opportunity. Never assuming that the gravy train will keep on rolling. I think that has been the best illustration of me doubling down, is going, this is an opportunity, I need to seize it with both hands, and it's going to come at some opportunity cost. I'm probably going to be tired. I'm probably not going to be the world's best friend to people for the next week because I am going to be playing 90 or 100 hours of poker, because this is the moment I need to seize, because this opportunity is fleeting, and if I don't grab it, someone else will, and it will be gone forever.
You know what? That makes me think of, at least for me, career-wise, when my Netflix show, I have a Netflix show called MindYourManners, which is a makeover reality show, and that came out.
I even watched a little bit of that. I was going to say, it was very good. I'm like, I definitely need this in my life. Clearly.
So it came out in 2022, and at the time I was living in China. And okay, I came over to a little bit of press for it, but I think I missed that opportunity of really doubling down on creating visibility for the show, being active and present. And, there was a season 1, 6 episodes, but didn't get a season 2. But I should have struck while the iron was hot. When my book, my Mind Your Manners, the etiquette book came out last year, that was when I was like, okay, you know what? Like I'm going to be in the States for a couple months. And I hired a publicist to really get the visibility of my book out there. And that actually led to me, now to getting my podcast. And now me basically moving to LA.
Right.
And that shows me really doubling down. And thank God I have a husband who's incredibly supportive.
That's important too. I guess my follow-up to that would be, what made you not double down when it came to the Netflix show? Was it self-worth? Was it doubt? Was it fear? Was it not knowing how to double down in that situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, well, firstly, I was living in Shanghai. And I was also very restricted by COVID because they had very strong COVID lockdowns. Like even going in and out of the country was tough. Like coming back in, you had to do 14 days of hotel quarantine, and flights were crazy, like very few flights and insanely expensive. So I was just like, when you're in China, you're kind of in China. It's its whole different ecosystem and bubble. I just thought like, oh, well, you know, I didn't think that I had to. I was like, okay, well, it'll come out. And there was something in me. I think it was like, was it maybe overconfidence? Maybe being...
This will naturally progress to the next thing. There'll be another season. There'll be more of this. And like more of the same. That's, for me, it's the doubling down. Oh, I had a good month. Well, in poker, there's no guarantee. Like you can play great yesterday. That counts for nothing today. And I think that reminding myself there's no credit for past performance has been a really helpful thing for continuing to kind of light a fire under me in terms of like, I've got to keep progressing because I don't get any points.
Well, but also I think more importantly is like that opportunity will not always be there, right? So for example, for you, that kind of poker game where you could win big wasn't always going to be there.
It's probably not there anymore, realistically.
Right. And then so even for me, like my work opportunity, you know, it's like, I mean, it's, you know, media in Hollywood, like something's hot for about a week. Like,
yeah, then the next hot thing comes
and then the next hot thing comes out. And so it's like that missed opportunity, which is why timing is also really important, right? It's like knowing when to act, when to fold, when to call.
I guess I have one more thought on that idea, which was playing in those big private games, which sounds glamorous and wonderful and a financial opportunity. The last ever time I played, I got cheated in that game.
What do you mean you got cheated? Somebody cheated on you?
So the game runner, the person who organized the game, hired a card mechanic. So someone to stack the deck so that me and a friend of mine who I won't name, like they were trying to make us, they basically create hands where we would lose lots of money. And
oh my good, that must be illegal.
I mean, home games in general are illegal, so I don't think you have a lot of recourse anyway. So I wasn't like, I'd be like, I'm going right to the FBI with it. But it was this idea of like, oh, okay. I got very lucky because they were very bad at it, which is to say they were cheating us in a way that was so preposterous and like, wait, this is...
Because your hand was so badly done.
My hand was so good, yet their hand was better. It was like this level of like, you see in Casino Royale where it's like, oh, this guy has a straight flush and this guy has a royal flush and this guy, like, it was this idea of like, okay, once a month, something like that could happen. 5 in 2 hours? I don't think so. And the last hand that I ever played, I made a huge fold with the second best possible hand because I was so sure I was being cheated. And I got up and I thought, this is where I need to stop. Because this was a somewhat expensive mistake at the end in terms of a learning experience. But it's like, if this is the worst that happens, I have had a wonderful career in private games because every other player I've talked to has a story that is 2, 3, 5, 10 times worse. And I think that was the moment where it's like, this isn't so much about hold'em or fold'em. This is about stopping showing up because this is no longer the opportunity that if you assess risk here, this is all risk and no upside.
And when you folded in that game, what happened?
I folded, I got up. The other professional players said some bad words and that you guys are cheating me. And he walked out and I said, oh, I think that's all for me. And I never went back.
Yeah.
And I'm still owed a lot of money from that game. But that's, again, risk is risk, right? If we talk about risk, but there is nothing on the line or no consequences, we're not really talking about risk. And I think balancing that and understanding that although that was not the outcome I wanted, I'm very happy that happened.
That you let yourself get out. Because there will be bad people. Just like in real life, there are bad people out to get you in real life. Like, and you need to know when to disengage.
Yeah. And I think that like, a lot of people think, oh, you're good at reading people in poker. And I'm like, I don't even know if that's true. I'm good at recognizing patterns. I don't think I'm great at that in life. I think that the way I shield myself is I have a very small circle and I don't let many people in. And I think that like that is often good in the sense of it keeps you safe, but it limits your opportunities because you don't make interesting connections and meet new wonderful people because you're quite closed off and cautious because letting people in comes with risk.
So what about bluffing? Is that, is it ever okay? I mean, okay, so the first time I played poker was actually pretty recent. It was last summer. And I'd been kind of like curious to play, but an opportunity hadn't really presented itself.
I'd be happy to play with you.
I would love to.
I'm used to sitting opposite people trying to figure out how to take their money. This is a very new experience.
So I was actually in Hong Kong. And I got a call from my friend Will, who was like, hey, I'm hosting a game at my house. Do you want to come? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'd never played in my life.
Of course he invited you.
And
They're the best players
yeah,
to
right,
bring.
exactly. So then I got in a cab, and it was like late at night. In the cab ride over there, I watched a 5-minute YouTube clip.
That's all you need.
How to play poker for beginners.
Perfect.
And I arrived and I was winning. And there were a couple, and it was all dudes. There was like me and another girl joined later on. And they were like, you're not playing like a beginner. And then that got me thinking, like, what does it mean to play like a beginner? Well, I was bluffing a lot.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people struggle with bluffing because bluffing is tied with lying, and most people get through trial and error, the boy who cried wolf, the sense that bluffing is not good because lying is not good, right?
So I actually went online and I looked up the definition. So Merriam-Webster says bluffing is to deceive or frighten by pretending to have strength or confidence that one does not really have. And then Oxford English Dictionary says bluffing is to try to deceive someone as to one's abilities or intentions. And of course, there's that famous song by Lady Gaga called Poker Face, where she goes
of course,
like...
I listen to it religiously. That's my pump-up song for poker.
Right? She goes like, because I'm bluffing with my muffin. I'm not lying. I'm just stunning. So bluffing is not exactly lying.
Okay, well then I stand corrected. Although I would say bluffing in poker is about telling a false narrative. I have a good hand when I don't, right? And
how do you do that in poker?
Usually by...
Like, give us an anecdote.
So usually...
Your best bluff.
I would say my best bluff is when other players at the table, and I won't use a specific hand, other players at the table, you couldn't possibly be bluffing because. And where it's really satisfying is because you'd already thought of the because and you had planned for it. And when you get to the situation where you are bluffing, they go, if you were bluffing, you would have done something else. And I think often preparation in poker is important, right? Going and studying and working on your game. The times where you really see that payoff is where you're at home thinking, how would they play a bluff? How would they play a good hand? Oh, they would do this or this. Now, they would play a good hand like this. I'm going to play a bluff like that because they're going to put their strategy onto me and they're going to say, oh, I wouldn't be bluffing here. And I think often people get excited by, oh, bluffing for large numbers of dollars. And I think that often that's less interesting than the story you told with that bluff. And bluffing, he was a strong player, but I had thought a lot about how he thought about the game because I knew I was going to be playing a lot with him and saying, oh, he would perceive it this way. So therefore, this is the most credible story, even though it's not very much money. It's not a very big, and I don't look intimidating or scary. It was credible. And I think like that is the piece of bluffing that I think is so interesting. It's selling a story, not just a scary story.
It sounds like bluffing is an art, right? And because you have to convince others you have a stronger hand than you do. And that requires careful timing. And from what I'm hearing you say, psychological insight into the behavior of your opponents.
But also it allows us to exploit one of those two primary drivers, fear.
Fear or greed.
Right. I'm frightened you have a good hand. The pain of me calling and you having a good hand is going to outweigh the joy of me calling and you showing me a bluff. And I think that this is why we get to bluff so much in poker, because people's risk tolerances are low and their fear is high and they wouldn't bluff themselves. So when I teach players poker, we do like pretty intense long courses, right? And I say, oh, if I was to give you a 6-second version of this, it would be more aggressive and bluff more. And if you can do that in poker, you will win more money. Now in life, I struggle to bluff. I feel uncomfortable and I don't know if I
Do you think it's because you're English? Maybe if you're American, you bluff
almost certainly
easier.
that's going to be a piece of it. My biggest fear was you saying, hey, tell me about yourself. I was like, I think that's hell for any Englishman. Probably. I think that I wish poker prepared you to bluff in other environments, but I honestly don't think it does, because I think that bluffing in poker can be quantified of like, oh, this was good or bad, or this would win me this much. And you can use software and programs to sort of figure out those things. Bluffing in life, not only maybe it doesn't work right now, but maybe it doesn't work later, or maybe you get caught out. And I think that...
But remember, it's not lying. I feel like in America, there's so much fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it,
And so it does make me think like, a lot of startup founders or people like it's like
Sure.
you maybe bluffing is a part of being successful, especially in America.
Probably.
And definitely in China. In China, there's so much bluffing. It's like you have to, everything's smoke and mirrors in China.
Right.
In fact, there's flat out lying in China.
I guess
Hope I don't get banned from China. by
I
saying
guess
this.
there probably is some fake it till you make it. I struggle with that, I would say, which is why I think the people that I work with are much better at that. I think my business partner, Mark, is really good.
Yeah,
at,
you said you called him a compulsive liar, which I thought was hilarious because
Yeah.
I watched that YouTube intro of you guys.
I know, and you were like, "Oh, I didn't know he was a school bus
Yeah,
driver."
because he goes, "I'm Mark. I was a former school bus driver,"
like,
and I said,
he's-
and you were like, "He's a compulsive liar."
he's never driven a school bus, and he'll tell you he's 46 and he's
So I've definitely bluffed before.
Okay.
I mean, so first of all, I feel you can apply it to like job interviews, negotiations, social situations, but it's just not revealing your true feelings or intentions, and it's either to avoid yourself or protect ourselves or to create an opportunity. And I've definitely bluffed to create an opportunity. And it was when I started my etiquette school in Beijing in 2012, and I hadn't actually fully launched it yet. I was just doing some soft courses just to test the market. And somehow word got out, and I got this phone call on my cell phone. And at that time, my Mandarin was still very broke. It wasn't good at all. I grew up in Hong Kong, speaking English and Cantonese.
sure.
And there was a journalist who was speaking very quickly to me in Mandarin saying, "I heard you opened an etiquette school. We're trying to do a piece on it before Christmas." She called me on December, early December. "We're trying to do a piece before Christmas. We want to come and watch one of your classes." And I was like, okay, which media outlet are you? And I didn't have it. I just taught a class. I didn't have one lined up yet. And she kept saying it in Chinese. She said, 金融时报, 金融时报. And I was like, what is that? So I was like, can you please text me your email address? So she said, okay, because I knew her email would have it. I got it, and it was her name at ft.com.
Okay.
Okay, Financial Times.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay. I was like, so I texted back. I was like, no problem. I do have another course coming up. I didn't.
Sure.
I was like, I will send you the date. Because she was like, we're going to fly in from Shanghai with Patty Waldmere, who's our Shanghai bureau chief. And I was like, okay, because this girl was like her assistant. And so I then like immediately set about like setting up another class, posting an announcement. People signed up, and that was the class. And that got on the front page of the FT. And it was Christmas weekend.
That's so much about
2012.
seizing an opportunity and not letting fear stop you. Going, well,
But that's also bluffing at the poker table, right? Seizing an
Yeah.
opportunity and not letting fear stop you.
yeah, I think fear can be a huge block of just going, I'll wait for the next one. The next one will be less scary. And every time you wait for the next one, I've never found the next one to be any less scary. If anything, it grows because you're like, well,
That's true.
it's,
Yeah,
it's
it
that
grows.
anticipation, that panic continues
And
to
the
grow.
dopamine and okay, so Gethen, this has been fun. Let's end with how to bluff. So what are strategies for, of course, we're saying ethical and effective bluffing. We need to know how to bluff better.
Tell credible stories.
Tell credible stories.
I think knowledge in that area, even if you don't have knowledge in what you want to do with that topic, is really valuable. I think I was a terrible poker coach when I started, but I knew a lot about poker. I didn't know how to teach poker. And I said, yeah, I can teach poker. And then my credibility as a poker player allowed me to learn how to be a good poker coach. And those were very different things. And I think bluffing in that was saying, yeah, I'll figure that out because if I'm good at poker, I can make you good at poker. And I think that people go, well, of course, because he'll share what he knows and therefore I'll be good. And not knowing how to share it was a huge roadblock. But I had this fake confidence that I'm like, yeah, I'll be able to distill down 60,000 hours of learning into these hour calls with you, no problem. And I had no idea what that would look like, but I said I could do it. And then I went about trying to figure out actually how to.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you want to have confidence, not arrogance, right? Because bluffing is about confidence. I don't think it's about overconfidence because you want to speak with assurance, which is sounding credible. I feel like you don't want to seem too eager or too aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, think as an English person, feeling or sounding too eager and arrogant It's probably not going to be a huge issue for me. I think self-doubt is...
self-doubt is a bigger issue
it's a bigger issue for me.
Well, our audience are mostly Americans, so...
Right, well...
So don't overdo it, maybe. A good bluff is subtle.
I think a good bluff is subtle, and I think a good bluff often comes from a core understanding and then just reaching a little further than maybe you were comfortable with. I think like
so stretching
a little bit,
20% stretch.
Yeah, doing something different with things that you are familiar with. Like, I think a lot of people would be unwarranted with no skills doing something totally different. But I think if you have some skill, maybe you're a great communicator, maybe you're a great player or a great coach, learning something within that field and then expanding on it. I think like baby steps rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to reinvent myself and be incredible overnight. That sounds like delusion to me. I think adding pieces to a puzzle, that sounds like progress.
But what about the act of bluffing? Like, give us tips for the act of bluffing. I feel like mastering the poker face is one of them.
I think mastering the poker face, and then once you've made the move, complete acceptance. I think that for me was really helpful. So, for example, I would bluff in a hand, and sometimes in poker hands, someone will take 5 minutes to think about what to do versus my bluff. So I've gone all in, lots of money in the middle, and I'm sitting there unable to
make changes, right?
I can't say, actually, I'm just kidding, I want that money back. I have to sit there and be at peace with whether they call or fold. And for me, I use a weird displacement methodology in that spot, which is I picture a grocery store in my head and I walk around trying to pick out ingredients for a dish I don't know how to make. And for me...
And so that helps you with your poker face, right?
It helps me understand that at this point, worrying, caring, and trying to change things.
Yeah, because you made your bluff. It's up to the other person to call it or not. So it sounds like also silence is part of it, right? Like you make your bluff and then you use silence to your advantage, right? Where it's like you pause, you say nothing, and it makes you seem thoughtful and in control.
I try and find genuine peace internally because I do think people are somewhat intuitive. And I think if you appear to be a bubbling wreck, I don't know if they would be able to articulate that, but that might skew them to being like, I think this guy might be bluffing. Yeah. And if I can be calm and curious because I'm trying to figure out how to make sweet and sour chicken, that's, for me, has worked very well.
That's so true. People who bluff, like, and who are just big talkers, people who talk a big game all the time, you tend to discount what they're saying. Because you're like, because they're just babbling all the time. So whatever he says, I'm just going to apply a 20% discount or a 50% discount. But it's the people who aren't talking all the time. They're like in control, they're composed.
Less to prove.
Less to prove because they're not overdoing it. That is the one that's really convincing. This is Mind Your Manners, and I'm your host, Sara Jane Ho. No matter what life throws at you, with me in your ear, you got this. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and check us out on YouTube.